My name's Jaden. I'm 24 living in a small apartment on the west side of Seattle where the rain seems to have a permanent lease. It's not much a one bedroom with creaky floors and a view of a parking lot, but it's mine. I work part time at an electronics repair shop fixing cracked phone screens and untangling headphone wires for people who swear they didn't drop their devices. It's not glamorous, but it pays the bills, keeps my fridge stocked with beer, and leaves me enough time to watch basketball with my buddies. Life's simple, and I've never been one to chase anything more complicated than that. It was a Saturday afternoon, one of those quiet ones where the world feels like it's moving in slow motion. The sky was gray, typical for Seattle in October, with a damp chill that clung to your skin. I was sprawled on my couch scrolling through my phone, the TV humming some game I wasn't really watching. That's when I saw the missed call from Derek, my best friend since high school. He's the kind of guy who'd give you the shirt off his back but forget where he parked his car. His voicemail was short. Yo, Jay, I left my headphones at your place last night. Can you drop them off? I'm dying without my music. I laughed to myself, picturing him fumbling through his gym bag, cursing. We'd watched the Lakers get crushed at my place the night before, splitting a pizza and arguing about refs until midnight. His headphones, sleek black over-ear ones, were still on my coffee table, tangled in a mess of charging cords. No big deal, I thought. Derek's place was only a 10-minute drive across town in a middle-class neighborhood, with tidy lawns and mailboxes shaped like little houses. I'd been there 100 times enough to know the route without GPS, the kind of familiarity you build with a friend who feels like family. I grabbed the headphones, tossed them into my backpack, and pulled on a hoodie. My car, an old Toyota Corolla with a dented fender, grumbled to life as I headed out. The streets were quiet, just a few kids on bikes and a dog walker wrestling with a leash. Derek's house was a two-story cream-colored place with a wraparound porch and a basketball hoop in the driveway. It always felt like the kind of home you'd see in a family movie, warm, lived in with a faint smell of cedar from the trees out back. I parked, slung my backpack over one shoulder, and walked up the stone path to the front door. The air was cool, carrying the scent of wet leaves and distant rain. I pressed the doorbell, expecting Derek to swing the door open with his usual grin, probably still in his gym shorts. But the door didn't open right away. I waited, shifting my weight, the headphones dangling from my hand. Just as I was about to ring again, the door creaked open, and there she was, Lauren, Derek's mom. I froze for a second, caught off guard. She was standing there, wrapped in a white towel, her dark hair wet and clinging to her shoulders. Her skin was flushed like she'd just stepped out of the shower, and her green eyes widened slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing her face. But then she smiled, a soft, effortless smile that didn't seem embarrassed at all. "Jaden," she said, her voice warm, almost amused. "Derek just ran to the store. He'll be back soon. Want to come in?" I blinked, my brain scrambling to catch up. I'd met Lauren plenty of times before. She'd always been around when I hung out with Derek, offering snacks or asking about school. She was kind, reserved, the kind of mom who worked long hours at the hospital and still managed to keep the house spotless. I'd never thought much about her beyond that. She was just Derek's mom. But standing there with the faint scent of lavender shampoo in the air and that calm, confident look in her eyes, she didn't feel like just anything. Yeah, sure," I said, my voice catching a little. I held up the headphones like some kind of awkward peace offering, just dropping these off for Derek. She stepped aside, motioning me in, and I hesitated for a split second before crossing the threshold. The house was quiet, the only sound the faint hum of the fridge in the kitchen. The living room smelled of fresh laundry, and sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting soft stripes across the hardwood floor. Lauren closed the door behind me, her towel shifting slightly as she moved. "I'll be right back," she said, gesturing toward the couch. "Make yourself at home. Want some tea or something?" I nodded, more out of reflex than anything, and sat down, feeling out of place in a house I knew so well. The headphones sat in my lap, a reminder of why I was here, but my eyes kept drifting to the hallway where Lauren had disappeared. Something about the way she'd looked at me, steady, unguarded, made my pulse tick up a notch. A few minutes later, she came back, now in a loose beige sweater and jeans, her hair still damp but tucked behind her ears. She handed me a steaming mug of chamomile tea, her fingers brushing mine for just a second. "Sorry about the towel thing," she said, sitting across from me in an armchair, her legs crossed casually. "Didn't expect company." "No worries," I said, trying to sound normal, but my voice came out too quick. I took a sip of the tea, the warmth spreading through my hands. The room felt smaller somehow, the air heavier, though nothing had really happened. Not yet. But as she leaned back, her eyes catching mine over the rim of her own mug, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd just stepped into something I didn't fully understand. I sat on the couch in Derek's living room, the chamomile tea warming my hands, the faint scent of lavender still lingering from Lauren's entrance. The house was quiet, save for the soft tick of a clock somewhere down the hall. The headphones I'd come to drop off sat beside me, forgotten for the moment. I kept stealing glances at the hallway where Lauren had gone to change my mind, replaying the way she'd stood in that towel, her green eyes calm but piercing. I shook my head, trying to focus. This was Derek's mom. I was just here to do a quick errand. Nothing more. Lauren came back a few minutes later, her damp hair now loose, cascading over her shoulders in dark waves. She wore a beige sweater thin enough to hug her frame and a pair of faded jeans that made her look effortlessly put together. She settled into the armchair across from me, cradling her own mug of tea, her legs crossed casually. The sunlight filtering through the blinds cast soft shadows across her face, highlighting the faint lines around her eyes, lines that spoke of years lived, not just time passed. She looked at me, her expression open, almost curious. "So, Jaden," she said, her voice steady. "How's life treating you these days?" I shrugged, trying to play it cool, though my pulse was still a little too quick. "Same old, I guess. Work basketball keeping my apartment from falling apart." I forced a chuckle, hoping it didn't sound as awkward as it felt. "Nothing exciting." She tilted her head, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Nothing exciting. Come on, you're 24. I remember being that age. Felt like the world was wide open." Her tone wasn't patronizing. It was warm, like she genuinely wanted to know. I noticed the way her fingers wrapped around her mug, steady, and sure, her nails unpainted but neat. "Yeah, well," I said, shifting in my seat, "maybe the world's open, but I'm not sure I'm running toward it." I don't know why I said that. It just slipped out rawer than I meant. Maybe it was the quiet of the room or the way she looked at me like she was actually listening. Her smile faded slightly, not in a bad way, but like she was thinking something over. "I get that," she said after a pause. "Sometimes you're so busy keeping things together you forget to look up." She took a sip of her tea, her eyes drifting to the window. "When Derek went off to college, this house got so quiet. Too quiet, honestly. I thought I'd love the freedom, but it's strange." I nodded, not sure what to say. I'd never thought about what it must be like for her living in this big house alone most of the time. Derek had mentioned she worked long hours at the hospital, always on her feet, always moving. I'd pictured her as the kind of person who had it all figured out, steady job, nice house, grown kid. But the way she said strange with a softness that wasn't weak but real made me see her differently. She wasn't just Derek's mom anymore. She was Lauren, a woman who carried her own weight, her own stories. "You get used to it though, right?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. The quiet, I mean. She laughed, a low, genuine sound that made the room feel smaller. "You'd think so. But it sneaks up on you. One day you're running around making sure your kid doesn't burn the house down, and the next, you're wondering why you're cooking dinner for one." She looked at me, her eyes steady. "What about you? You're not cooking for one, are you? Some girlfriend keeping you in line?" I snorted, shaking my head. "Nah, no girlfriend. Just me and my bad cooking skills." I paused, then added, "I'm not exactly the settling down type. At least not yet." Her smile returned, a little playful this time. "Not yet. You've got time, Jaden. Don't rush it. Trust me, I rushed into things when I was younger. Didn't always work out." She didn't elaborate, but the weight in her voice hinted at something deeper. A marriage that hadn't lasted, maybe, or dreams she'd set aside. I wanted to ask, but it didn't feel like my place. We talked for a while longer than I'd planned. The conversation drifted from Derek's college antics to my job at the repair shop, then to her love of old jazz records she'd inherited from her dad. She had this way of talking, her hands moving slightly, her eyes lighting up when she hit on something she cared about. I found myself leaning forward, hanging on her words, not because they were profound, but because they felt real. Like she wasn't just making small talk to pass the time. The clock on the wall chimed softly, and I realized I'd been there for almost an hour. Derek still wasn't back, and the headphones were still sitting untouched beside me. "I should probably get going," I said, though part of me didn't want to move. "Derek's probably wondering where his headphones are." Lauren set her mug down, her eyes catching mine for a moment longer than necessary. "Thanks for staying, Jaden," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It was nice to have someone to talk to." I needed that today. I stood, slinging my backpack over my shoulder, the headphones suddenly feeling heavier in my hand. Anytime I said, and I meant it though, I wasn't sure why. As I walked to the door, her gaze followed me, and I felt a tug in my chest, a mix of warmth and something I couldn't name. I stepped outside into the cool Seattle air, the sky now a deeper gray. Driving home, the city lights blurred past, but all I could think about was her voice, her smile, and the way the room had felt just a little too small when she looked at me. The days after I left Lauren's house felt different, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. I went back to my routine fixing phones at the shop, watching games, grabbing takeout, but her voice kept creeping into my thoughts. The way she'd said I needed that today with that quiet, honest weight stuck with me. I kept picturing her in that beige sweater, the way her eyes lit up when she talked about jazz records. It wasn't like I was planning to do anything about it. She was Derek's mom, for God's sake. But the memory of that afternoon lingered like the smell of rain on pavement. It was Monday, 2 days later, when I saw her again. I'd stopped by the local grocery store after work to grab some milk and cereal, nothing ambitious, just enough to keep me from starving. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the aisles were mostly empty, just a few shoppers pushing carts. I was standing by the pasta section half-heartedly scanning the shelves when I heard a familiar voice. "Jaden, you're not actually cooking, are you?" I turned, and there was Lauren standing at the end of the aisle holding a jar of spaghetti sauce. She wore a navy jacket and jeans, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail, a few strands framing her face. She looked different out here, less like the polished mom I'd always known, and more like someone I could have met anywhere. Her smile was small but warm, and it hit me how natural it felt to see her. I laughed, scratching the back of my neck. "Nah, I'm more of a cereal for dinner guy. What about you, that sauce for a gourmet meal, or what?" I nodded at the jar in her hand. She rolled her eyes, but there was a playful glint in them. "Hardly. Derek's out with friends tonight, and I'm not in the mood to cook for one. Thought I'd make something simple." She paused, tilting her head. "You know I'm making lasagna. Probably too much for just me. If you're free, you could join me. Save me from leftovers for a week." My stomach did a quick flip, not because of the food, but because of the way she looked at me, like the invitation wasn't just about dinner. I hesitated, my brain flashing to Derek, to the headphones I'd dropped off, to the fact that this was his mom. But the hesitation didn't last. "Yeah, I'm free," I said, trying to sound casual. Lasagna sounds better than cereal. Her smile widened, and she motioned for me to follow her to the checkout. We didn't talk much as we walked, just small stuff. Her complaining about the store's overpriced cheese, me joking about my non-existent cooking skills. But there was an ease to it, like we'd done this before. By the time we got to her house, the sky was turning a deep indigo, the streetlights flickering on. Inside, the kitchen smelled of garlic and herbs, the kind of warmth that wraps around you. Lauren set the table while the lasagna baked, the oven's hum mixing with the soft jazz playing from a speaker on the counter. She moved with a quiet confidence, setting out plates, pouring water into glasses, her hands steady but relaxed. I offered to help, but she waved me off, pointing to a chair. "Sit, you're a guest tonight." I sat, feeling a little out of place, but not uncomfortable. The dining room was cozy, with a wooden table and a single candle flickering in the center. The light caught her face as she sat across from me, her green eyes softer now, less guarded than they'd been in the store. We ate, and the conversation flowed easily about her job at the hospital, my long hours at the repair shop, the way Seattle's rain never seemed to let up. But then it shifted to something deeper. "You ever feel like you're just going through the motions?" she asked, setting her fork down. Her voice was quiet, not sad, but searching. Like you've got everything you're supposed to have, but still not enough. I leaned back, surprised by the question. "Yeah," I admitted. "Sometimes I feel like I'm stuck. Like I'm waiting for something to happen, but I don't know what." I paused, looking at her. "What about you? You seem like you've got it all together." She laughed, but it wasn't bitter, just honest. "Appearances, Jaden. When Derek left for college, I thought I'd feel free. No more packed lunches, no more late-night worries, but it's just empty sometimes. I used to dream about opening a little bookstore, just me, some shelves, good coffee. Never happened." She looked down at her plate, her fingers tracing the edge. Life gets in the way. I didn't know what to say. I'd never pictured her like this, not the put-together mom who always had snacks ready but a woman with dreams she'd tucked away. You could still do it, I said, the words coming out before I could stop them. The bookstore, I mean. You're not that old. She raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at her lips. Not that old, huh? Careful, you're gonna make me feel young again. Her tone was teasing, but her eyes held mine a moment too long, and my chest tightened. The rest of the night passed in a blur of stories, her talking about road trips she took in her 20s, me admitting I'd never left the West Coast. When I stood to leave, the candle had burned low and the jazz had looped back to the same song. She walked me to the door, her hands in her pockets, her expression softer than I'd ever seen. Thanks for coming, Jaden, she said, her voice low. It's been a while since I've had a night like this. I knotted my throat tight. Yeah, me too. I stepped outside, the cool night air hitting my face, but as I drove home, the warmth of her kitchen lingered. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew I wanted to see her again. Not as Derek's mom, but as Lauren. And that thought scared me as much as it thrilled me. The lasagna dinner at Lauren's house left a mark on me like a song you can't stop humming. I went back to my routine, clocking in at the repair shop, swapping texts with Derek about the next game, grabbing coffee from the same tired drive-thru. But something had shifted. Every quiet moment my mind wandered back to her kitchen, the flicker of that candle, the way her voice softened when she talked about her abandoned bookstore dream. I told myself it was nothing, just a good conversation with a woman who happened to be my best friend's mom. But deep down, I knew better. A week later, I ran into Lauren again, this time at a small park a few blocks from her house. It was one of those crisp Seattle mornings where the air smelled of pine and damp grass, the kind of day that made you want to walk instead of drive. I was jogging, earbuds in, when I spotted her sitting on a bench reading a paperback. She wore a gray scarf and a fitted jacket, her hair loose, catching the pale sunlight. I slowed down, debating whether to keep going or say something. Before I could decide, she looked up and smiled, closing her book. Jaden, she said, her voice carrying that same warmth. Didn't know you were a runner. I pulled out my earbuds, catching my breath. Yeah, sometimes. Keeps me from going stir-crazy. I nodded at her book. What's that one for your imaginary bookstore? She laughed, holding up the worn copy of The Great Gatsby. Maybe. I've read it 100 times, but it never gets old. She patted the bench beside her. Sit for a minute, unless you're training for a marathon. I hesitated, but only for a second, then sat down. The wood was cold through my sweatpants and the park was quiet except for the rustle of leaves and a distant dog barking. We talked about books, about how she used to sneak novels into her hospital shifts, about my failed attempt to read anything longer than a Reddit thread. It was easy like the dinner, but there was something new in the air. Her eyes lingered on mine a little longer, and when she laughed, her hand brushed my arm, light but deliberate. I felt it in my chest, a warmth that had no business being there. After that, we started seeing each other more often, not by accident, but not quite planned either. A coffee run at a hole-in-the-wall cafe near the repair shop where she'd show up during my lunch break with a paperback tucked under her arm. A late afternoon walk along the waterfront, the Puget Sound shimmering under a gray sky, her scarf fluttering in the wind. They weren't dates, at least we never called them that. But they weren't just friendly chats either. Every time I saw her, I noticed something new, the way her fingers curled around her coffee cup, the faint freckles across her nose, the quiet strength in her voice when she talked about her life. One evening, we ended up at a small movie theater in Capitol Hill watching some old black and white film she'd picked. The theater was half empty, the air thick with the smell of popcorn and old velvet seats. We sat close, our shoulders brushing in the dark, and when the credits rolled, neither of us moved right away. Outside, the city was alive with neon lights and the hum of traffic, but we walked slowly side by side under the glow of street lamps. At a quiet corner, she stopped, her hands in her pockets, and looked at me. You're making this hard, Jaden, she said, her voice low, almost a whisper. Making what hard, I asked, though I knew exactly what she meant. My heart was pounding, and the cool night air did nothing to calm it. She smiled, but it was tinged with something heavier. Pretending this is just nothing. Before I could respond, she reached out and took my hand, her fingers warm against mine. It wasn't a grand gesture, just a simple touch. But it felt like the world tilted. We stood there, her hand in mine, the city buzzing around us, and for the first time, I let myself admit it, I was falling for her. Not Derek's mom, Lauren. But the weight of that hit me hard. Driving home that night, my mind was a mess. She was 42, a good 18 years older than me. She was my best friend's mom, for God's sake. Derek and I had been through everything together: high school pranks, late night talks, the time he bailed me out when my car broke down. What was I doing? This wasn't just some fling I could shrug off. If Derek found out, it'd change everything. And what about Lauren? She'd been through a divorce, built a life for herself. Was I just some kid to her, a distraction from the quiet she'd talked about? The questions churned in my head, each one heavier than the last. The next day I saw her again at the cafe. She was waiting outside, her hair tucked under a knit cap, a takeout cup in her hand. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "You look like you didn't sleep." I forced a smile, rubbing the back of my neck. "Yeah, just long night." I wanted to say more, to ask what we were doing, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, we walked to a nearby pier, the water lapping against the docks, the air sharp with salt. She talked about a patient she'd cared for at the hospital, a story that made her laugh and tear up at the same time. I listened, watching the way her face lit up, and I realized I didn't just want to see her smile, I wanted to be the reason for it. But every time I thought about that, Derek's face flashed in my mind and guilt settled in my chest like a stone. As we stood by the water, she turned to me, her expression softer now. "You don't have to figure it all out, Jaden," she said, like she could read my thoughts. "Sometimes things just are." Her hand brushed mine again, and I didn't pull away. But as I drove home later, the city lights blurring past, I knew I was crossing a line I couldn't uncross. And I wasn't sure if I wanted to. The moment Lauren took my hand on that Seattle street, something locked into place. It wasn't just a touch, it was an admission, a line crossed that neither of us could pretend hadn't happened. Over the next few weeks, we saw each other more, always careful, always when Derek wasn't around. A morning coffee at a tucked-away cafe near Pike Place, the air thick with the smell of roasted beans and salt water. An evening walk through a quiet park, the crunch of gravel under our shoes. The city skyline glowing in the distance. We didn't call it anything, didn't label it. But every time I saw her, my chest tightened with a mix of want and worry. I was falling deeper, and the deeper I fell, the louder the voice in my head got about Derek. Lauren seemed to sense it too, though she never pushed. She'd smile, her green eyes catching mine over a cup of coffee, and say something light to pull me out of my head. "You're thinking too hard again, Jaden." She'd tease, her voice soft, but knowing. I'd laugh it off, but the truth was, I was torn. She wasn't just some woman I'd met at a bar, she was Derek's mom, the person who'd bandaged his knee when we were kids, who'd driven us to basketball practice in her old minivan. And Derek was my best friend, the guy who'd stuck by me through every dumb decision I'd ever made. The thought of him finding out made my stomach twist. We kept it quiet, meeting only when we knew he was at school or out with friends. One morning we sat at a corner table in a cafe, the windows fogged from the October chill. Lauren was telling me about a jazz concert she'd gone to years ago, her hands moving. As she described the music, her face lit up in a way that made her look younger, freer. I was half listening, half watching the way her hair fell across her cheek when my phone buzzed. Derek's name flashed on the screen. I froze, my coffee cup halfway to my mouth. "You gonna answer that?" Lauren asked, her tone neutral, but her eyes flicked to the phone, a shadow crossing her face. I shook my head, letting it go to voicemail. "I'll call him later." But my voice sounded tighter than I meant. The truth was, I didn't know what to say to him anymore. Every time we talked, I felt like I was lying, hiding this thing that was growing bigger by the day. Lauren reached across the table, her fingers brushing mine, not holding, but just resting there. "You don't have to carry it all, Jaden," she said quietly. "We're in this together." I nodded, but the guilt didn't loosen its grip. That night I listened to Derek's voicemail. His voice was casual, the same old Derek. "Yo, Jay, you free this weekend? Mom's been weirdly happy lately, man. She's like humming all the time. You notice anything when you dropped off my headphones?" My heart sank. I texted back something vague. "She seemed fine, dude. Probably just work stuff." But my hands were shaking as I typed. He didn't know. He couldn't know. But the fact that he'd noticed her mood, that he'd connected it to me, felt like a warning. The next time I saw Lauren, it was at her house a Thursday evening when Derek was at a study group. She'd invited me over to watch an old movie, one of those grainy romances she loved. The living room was dim lit only by a floor lamp and the glow of the TV. We sat on the couch, a bowl of popcorn between us, but I couldn't focus on the screen. My mind kept replaying Derek's voicemail, his words looping like a bad song. Lauren noticed, pausing the movie. "What's wrong?" she asked, turning to face me, her knees tucked under her. I ran a hand through my hair, staring at the carpet. Derek called. He he said you've been happier lately, asked if I noticed anything. I looked at her, expecting her to tense up, but she just nodded, her expression calm but thoughtful. "He's not wrong," she said, her voice steady. "I am happier. I didn't realize it was that obvious." She paused, setting the remote down. "Does that scare you?" I swallowed, my throat tight. "It's not just that. It's him. He's my best friend, Lauren. If he finds out, it's going to mess everything up. And you're his mom. I don't want to be the guy who ruins that." She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes soft but unflinching. "You're not ruining anything, Jaden. I'm not saying this is easy or that it makes sense. But I'm not going to pretend I don't feel what I feel." She leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping. "Do you—" I couldn't look away. The room felt too small, the air too thick. "Yeah," I admitted, the word heavy. "I feel it, but I don't know how to do this without screwing everything up." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached out her hand, resting on my arm, warm and steady. "We don't have to have all the answers," she said. "Not tonight." Her touch grounded me, but it didn't erase the knot in my chest. We sat there, the movie forgotten, the silence filled with everything we weren't saying. When I left that night, the rain had started, a soft drizzle that blurred the streetlights. I drove home, my hands tight on the wheel, Derek's voice echoing in my head. The next few days were a blur of work and avoidance. I dodged Derek's texts, telling myself I just needed time to think. But every time I saw Lauren, another coffee, another walk, her smile pulling me in like gravity, the guilt got louder. I was falling for her hard, and it wasn't just some crush. It was the way she listened, the way she made me feel like I was more than just a guy fixing phones. But Derek was always there, a shadow in the back of my mind. I didn't know how to balance it, wanting her and not wanting to lose him. And as I walked back to my apartment, the Seattle rain soaking through my jacket, I wondered how long we could keep this secret before it broke something. The rain hadn't stopped for days, a steady Seattle drizzle that turned the streets into a blur of gray. I'd been carrying the weight of Lauren and Derek in my chest, a knot of guilt and want that tightened every time my phone buzzed with a text from either of them. Lauren's messages were short, "warm a coffee tomorrow," or a "thinking of you," but they pulled me in like a tide. Derek's were casual, oblivious, asking about games or weekend plans. I'd answer him with half-truths, each one heavier than the last. I knew I couldn't keep dodging him forever, but I also couldn't walk away from Lauren. Not now. Not when being around her felt like the only time I wasn't just going through the motions. It was a Friday evening, a week after Derek's voicemail had shaken me. Lauren texted me to come over, saying Derek was at a friend's place for the night. I drove to her house, the wipers slapping rhythmically against my windshield, the city lights smearing across the glass. The air smelled of wet pavement and cedar as I stepped onto her porch, my heart pounding harder than it should have. She opened the door before I could knock, wearing a simple black sweater and jeans, her hair loose, a faint smile on her face. "You look like you're carrying the world," she said, stepping aside to let me in. The house was warm, the faint scent of vanilla from a candle on the coffee table mixing with the lingering smell of dinner. We sat on the couch, the same one where I'd held that mug of tea weeks ago, back when this was just a favor for Derek. Now it felt like a different world. Lauren curled her legs under her, her green eyes steady but searching. "You've been quiet lately," she said, her voice soft but direct. "What's going on, Jaden?" I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. The words were there, but they felt stuck, like they'd break something if I let them out. "It's Derek," I said, finally, my voice low. "He's my best friend. He's been there for me forever. And us, it feels like I'm betraying him." I looked up at her, expecting her to pull back, but she just watched me, her expression calm, like she'd been waiting for this. She set her mug down, the soft clink loud in the quiet room. "I know," she said. "I think about him too. Every day. He's my son, Jaden. I'd do anything to protect him." She paused, her fingers tracing the edge of the couch. But I can't keep pretending I don't feel this. For the first time in years, I feel alive. Like I'm not just Derek's mom or the nurse who clocks out at midnight. I'm me again. Her words hit me hard, not because they were dramatic, but because they were so honest. I could see it in her, the way her shoulders relaxed when she laughed, the way her eyes lit up when we talked about nothing and everything. I'd seen her come alive too, and I knew I was part of it. I feel it too, I said, my throat tight. But I don't know how to do this without hurting him, or you, or everything. Lauren leaned closer, her hand resting on my arm, warm and steady. We don't have to hurt anyone, she said. Not if we're careful. Not if we're honest with ourselves. Her eyes held mine unflinching. I don't know where this goes, Jaden. I don't have a map for it, but I know I don't want to stop feeling this way. Do you? I looked at her, the candlelight flickering across her face, softening the lines of a life she'd lived long before me. I thought about walking away, going back to my quiet apartment, my simple life, pretending none of this had happened. But the thought of losing her, of losing the way she made me feel seen, not just as Derek's friend, but as me, felt like losing a piece of myself. No, I said the word heavy, but sure. I don't want to stop. She nodded, a small smile breaking through. Then we don't. Not yet. We just live in this for now. Her hand squeezed mine, not tightly, just enough to ground me. We keep it between us. For Derek's sake. For ours. The room felt smaller, the air charged with the weight of what we'd just said. No promises, no grand plans, just an agreement to keep going, to hold on to whatever this was. We sat there for a while, the rain tapping against the windows, the candle burning lower. She told me about a patient she'd lost at the hospital, her voice steady but heavy, and I told her about a time I'd felt lost back when I thought my life would never be more than fixing phones. It wasn't just talking, it was sharing, the kind that makes you feel like someone's seeing you for the first time. When I left that night, the rain had slowed to a mist, the streetlights casting halos on the wet pavement. Lauren walked me to the door, her hand brushing mine one last time. Take care of yourself, Jaden, she said, her voice soft but firm. We'll figure this out. I nodded, stepping into the night, my breath visible in the cold air. Driving home, the city felt quieter, like it was holding its breath with me. I'd made a choice not to walk away, not to pretend, but to stay in this messy, unspoken thing with Lauren. It wasn't clean or easy, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was choosing something that mattered. A year had passed since that rainy night when Lauren and I decided to keep going, to hold on to whatever this was without naming it. Seattle hadn't changed much, the same gray skies, the same damp air that smelled of pine and salt. But I had. I wasn't just the guy fixing phones anymore. I'd landed a better job at a small tech startup downtown, troubleshooting software instead of cracked screens. It wasn't a dream gig, but it gave me a steadier paycheck, a sense of direction I hadn't had before. And Lauren, she was part of that. Not because she pushed me, but because being around her made me want to be more. Derek had moved to Portland for his final year of college, chasing an internship that kept him busy. He'd text now and then, mostly about basketball or some dumb meme, but his visits home were rare. It made things easier for us in a way. Lauren and I didn't have to look over our shoulders as much, didn't have to time our meetings around his schedule. But the secrecy was still there. A quiet agreement we never broke. No one knew, not Derek, not my coworkers, not the neighbors who waved as I drove by. It was just us carving out moments in the spaces where the world couldn't reach. We found our rhythm in the small things. Coffee at a tucked-away cafe in Fremont where the barista knew our orders by heart, black for me latte for her. Late-night drives along the waterfront, the city lights reflecting on the Puget Sound, her hand resting on mine as we listened to jazz on the radio. Evenings at her house when Derek was gone, curled up on her couch with takeout watching old movies she loved. The air would smell of soy sauce or pizza, and the room would glow with the soft light of a lamp casting shadows on the walls. Those moments felt like ours, untouched by time or judgment. Lauren was different now, too. She smiled. More, laughed easier. She'd started taking a pottery class on weekends, something she'd always wanted to try but never had the time for. She'd show me her lopsided mugs, laughing at their imperfections, her hands dusted with clay. I'm terrible at this, she'd say, but her eyes sparkled with a kind of joy I hadn't seen when we first met. I'd tease her, saying her mugs were abstract art, and she'd swat my arm, her touch lingering just a second longer than it needed to. It wasn't just the laughter or the lightness, it was the way she seemed to carry herself now, like she'd found a piece of herself she'd lost. I'd changed too, though I didn't always see it. Lauren noticed, though. One evening, as we sat on her porch, the air cool with the promise of fall, she looked at me over her glass of wine. "You're different, Jaden," she said, her voice soft but sure. "You're not just going through the motions anymore." I shrugged, but she was right. I was taking risks at work, pitching ideas I'd never have voiced before. I'd even started saving up, thinking about a future I hadn't dared to imagine a year ago. She didn't make me better, she made me want to be. But the secrecy wasn't always easy. There were moments when I'd catch myself wanting more. Wanting to walk into a room with her, not caring who saw. I'd imagine what it'd be like to tell Derek to face whatever came next. But then I'd think of his voice, the way he'd trusted me since we were kids, and the guilt would creep back in. Lauren felt it too, I knew. Sometimes when we were alone, her smile would falter and she'd get quiet, staring out a window or tracing the rim of her glass. "He'd hate me," she said once, her voice barely above a whisper, after we'd spent an evening cooking together, the kitchen filled with the smell of roasted vegetables. I didn't have an answer, so I just held her hand, our fingers laced in the silence. We were careful always. We didn't text too much, didn't leave traces. When Derek called, I'd keep my answers short, steering clear of anything that felt like a lie. Lauren did the same, her voice steady when she talked to him, though I'd catch the flicker of worry in her eyes. It was a delicate balance, one we'd learned to navigate without saying much about it. But it worked. We'd built something real, something that didn't need a name to matter. One night, as we lay on her couch, the TV flickering with some forgotten movie, she rested her head on my chest, her breathing slow and even. The room smelled of popcorn and her lavender shampoo, and the world outside felt far away. "This is enough, isn't it?" she murmured, her voice soft against the quiet. I didn't answer right away, just ran my fingers through her hair, feeling the weight of her words. "Yeah," I said finally, "it's enough." Driving home that night, the streets slick with rain, I thought about what we had. It wasn't perfect, wasn't tidy. It was a secret kept in stolen moments and glances no one else saw. But it was ours. And as the city lights blurred past, I realized I didn't need more, not yet. Lauren had given me something I hadn't known I was missing, a reason to show up, to be more than the guy I'd been. And for now, that was all I needed. It's been over a year since I first walked up to Lauren's door with Derek's headphones, thinking it was just another errand. Seattle hasn't changed much since then. The rain still falls like it's got a personal vendetta. The air still carries that mix of pine and salt, and the city lights still blur into streaks when I drive at night. But me, I'm not the same guy who stood on that porch fumbling with a pair of earbuds, unprepared for what was about to unfold. Lauren changed that. Not because she tried to, but because she saw me in a way I hadn't seen myself. I was driving through her neighborhood the other night, my old Corolla rattling along the quiet streets. Her house came into view, the cream-colored two-story with the wraparound porch, its lights glowing warm against the dusk. I slowed down, not stopping, just letting my eyes linger on the familiar outline. The basketball hoop in the driveway was still there, though Derek hadn't shot hoops in months. He's in Portland now, building a life of his own, chasing internships and dreams I only hear about through texts. I smiled, thinking of him, but the smile came with a pang. He still doesn't know. Probably never will. And I've made my peace with that. Lauren and I still see each other, though it's not as often as it used to be. My job at the tech startup keeps me busy, long hours filled with code and coffee runs. She's thrown herself into her pottery classes, her hands always dusted with clay when I stop by her kitchen table crowded with mugs and bowls she's too hard on herself about. We don't meet in public, much too many eyes in a city that feels smaller every day. Instead, we steal moments in quiet places, her living room, with the jazz records spinning, a hidden bench by the waterfront where the waves drown out the world, a late-night diner where the waitress doesn't care who we are. Those moments are enough. They have to be. Last week we sat in her backyard, the air cool with the first bite of fall. The string lights she'd hung swayed gently, casting a soft glow over the patio. We shared a bottle of wine, the glasses sweating in the evening chill. She was telling me about a new project at the hospital, her voice steady but alive the way it gets when she's excited about something. I watched her, the way her hands moved, the way her eyes caught the light. She looked different from the woman who'd opened the door in a towel that day, freer somehow, like she'd shed a weight I couldn't see. "You're staring," she said, smirking, not looking up from her glass. "Can't help it," I said, and she laughed, the sound low and warm, like it was just for me. We didn't talk about the future, didn't make plans. That's not what this is. We've never needed to call it anything to pin it down with words like relationship or love. It just is. And in those moments with her laughter in the air and the night wrapping around us, I felt something I hadn't known I could: contentment. But it's not always easy. There are nights when I lie awake in my apartment, the hum of the city filtering through my window, and wonder what happens next. What if Derek comes home unexpectedly, sees something in the way we look at each other? What if someone else notices the neighbor who waves too long, the coworker who asks too many questions? The secrecy keeps us safe, but it's a weight too. Lauren feels it, I know. Sometimes I catch her staring out the window, her fingers still, her smile gone quiet. "He'd understand someday," she said once, her voice barely above a whisper, like she was trying to convince herself. I didn't argue. I just held her hand, letting the silence say what we couldn't. I think about Derek a lot. He's still my best friend, even if we talk less now. When he texts, I answer, keeping it light, keeping it normal. I tell myself I'm protecting him, that this secret is a kindness. Maybe it is. Maybe it's just cowardice. But every time I see Lauren, every time she looks at me like I'm more than the kid who showed up with headphones, I know I can't walk away. Not from her. Not from this. Driving home that night, the rain started again, a soft patter against my windshield. I passed her house one last time, the porch light a beacon in the dark. I thought about that first day, how I'd stood there clueless, thinking I'd be in and out in 5 minutes. I thought about the months that followed, the coffee runs, the walks, the nights when we didn't need words. I thought about Derek, his laugh, his trust, and the guilt that still sits in my chest like a stone. But most of all, I thought about Lauren, her strength, her warmth, the way she made me want to be better without ever asking me to change. This thing we have, it's not a fairy tale. It's not a movie with a neat ending, no grand confession or dramatic reveal. It's messy, quiet, hidden in the corners of our lives. But it's real. It's the way she looks at me when no one's watching, the way I feel when I'm with her, like I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. I don't know where it'll go, if it'll last another year or end tomorrow. But I know this love doesn't always need a name or a spotlight. Sometimes it's enough to just show up, to choose someone in the quiet moments, to hold on to what matters even when no one else sees. As I pulled into my parking lot, the rain heavier now, I let myself smile. Not because it was perfect, but because it was ours. And sometimes that's all you need.